Oh, is it?
Hi, welcome to the Scientistsage Sangha. I'm Nancy Anderson Dolan from Wise Heart Wellness, and we're so happy to have you here with us tonight to explore some more mind-opening, mind-bending ideas. And we're talking about stories tonight. And the idea about stories, it's so broad. So we're not gonna talk about all the possibilities about stories, but a pretty narrow slice of it that is meaningful to us. Because literally, we have to go back like to the beginning of time, because there were stories written on those cave walls, carved into the stone. And so we want to be very, we want to acknowledge how far back it's gone. It's, been shaping our reality literally since the beginning of time. And we're actually, going back and revising some of the stories of that time and trying to understand them differently. And we constantly revise our own stories. It isn't that we have one story and we stick to it, because actually that can be really problematic. Because they have all of the stories that we're exposed to, that we tell, that we create, they have a really big impact on our subconscious. And we may not even notice that after a while. And so, one of the most important things that I think I'll say tonight is that it's so important to be able to be conscious of the stories you are telling and to have a mind that's open enough and agile enough to change them when they're not benefiting you. And, like we learn from the old time stories like fairy tales and, those kinds of ancient indigenous stories. And it's wonderful to take them forward and integrate them into our new life story, because we use them to do so many things. We create community, we um, diminish community, create division with our stories, and we can inspire action. And sometimes it's wonderful, life giving, life affirming action. And it can be horrible action, like the Holocaust and those kinds of things. And so we want to be very careful and conscious about how we use stories. And because it's just so important about it. It's not that we can't really communicate without stories. Our brains are built for stories. When we just give people a chunk of data, just the raw facts about something, not nearly as much of our brain lights up as when we tell them a story. When we tell a story, we get lighting up in the emotional areas, in the memory areas, in the feeling areas. We get such a big experience. Where if we just say, oh, I took the number 2 bus across town, it doesn't, that doesn't elicit any emotion and not much memory. And so this idea of stories is so important. And many, many people have learned to use that, both for us and against us. So, but what it comes down to for us is we have to pay attention to the inner narrative, because those narratives, they leave actual physical changes in our brains, and mental changes, obviously, with both the ideas and the images we create when we're telling a story. They're very powerful and they're remembered longer. And so, good or bad, we remember it longer depending on the story we tell about it. So, there's incoming stories that other people have told us, and they might be about themselves or they might be about us. They can really have this cumulative impact about who we think we are and how we're going to live. It shapes our worldview, our perception of things. And so I love this idea, and I work often with people to help them adapt their stories, because if we don't pay attention to it, it's like this constant, like if there's been a big rain and it runs down the gutter, there's leaves and garbage and all sorts of stuff and sticks and that runs down the gutter. And if life is like that for us, but if we just take all that constant flow and try and fold it into a story about ourselves, it gets really um, too much to hold, too much to carry, and so much excess that's just not necessary. So we want to be constantly cleaning it up and opening it up and considering how it's impacting us, because we do create this ongoing changing narrative. And so as we learn to look at the narrative, and there's actually a whole arm of psychology that is narrative therapy and helping people change their narratives. And we want to notice which narratives cause us to be what kind of people, able to take certain actions or not. And we'll look for those because we can find patterns. Our brains love to find patterns, but we can also imagine patterns because our brains love to find patterns. And so the stories we have will hold those patterns for us, and we can see them a little more easily. So there, even though our stories hold our lives together, they can be full of inaccuracies, okay? And maybe unrelated events even that just happened at the same time, like a puppy that touches something hot and there's a loud noise at the same time. They will come to associate the loud noise with that experience with something hot. They're totally irrelevant with each other, but this is what happens to us. And so as we take care of those bits of information, a piece of information, and decide how we want to see it, there is one issue I want to address before we go a little further into that, is that we can move over to the dark side. And in the article in this week's email that I sent out, it talked about it as the a spiritual bypass is how they talked about it. And what they were meaning is that our stories can be detrimental if we create them to masquerade as positive thinking or avoid realities we don't want to deal with or avoid feelings we don't want to feel. And we do develop stories for those purposes to make ourselves more comfortable. And so we need to be open-minded about that and watch for that to come up. Literally, if we use stories to accommodate problems rather than accept them and evolve situations. So we can get into storytelling about fixing and figuring, like if I had just done it like that, it would be okay. Or worse, if you would just do this thing, then I would be okay. Those kind of stories are definitely moving on to the dark side of it. And it's good for us to pay attention, to notice that, if we've moved into that kind of storytelling, that kind of narrative in our lives, where we give someone else all the power in our lives, or we are diminishing ourselves frequently. And the diminishing ourselves, having lack of regard for ourselves, is more a European and Western world kind of idea. In a number of Eastern cultures, they really don't even understand what we're talking about when we have self-hate. That's a story that's developed in a different milieu of people and understanding and concepts and cultural expectations. So those things have been woven through too. So we might want to use these made up stories to make us believe that we're okay, even when we don't feel okay underneath, and we avoid going into that deep story and just have a nice surface story that may make us feel good for a little bit, but really it gives us no stable base. So we want to build our stories on a firm foundation. And we might use stories to compel people to believe like we do. There's been religious stories since the beginning of time that try and compel other people to believe differently than they do. And that doesn't mean we don't share our stories when we have different beliefs. But this idea of trying to compel people to see the world in one way, rather than opening up to see people see the world in many different ways. So that's another story we might want to be careful with. And there is a real problem that if I am just focusing on only the positives, seeing none of the negatives, and that does not have any place in my story, we limit our lives. We don't learn from our difficulties if we ignore them or bury them. if we can open up to those difficulties, often they do lead to positive life growth. And so we want to include that in our stories that way, that things are difficult, not hiding the fact that it's difficult or traumatic or any of those things, because all of us have difficult things in our lives too. It is part of the weave of the natural story of life. So we want to be open to that and inclusive in that in our bigger story. But we can, rather than go on and on about how this horrible thing happened, you say, yes, this was part of my story, and here's where I'm at right now, or here's where I'm trying to go with it, or, having that bigger space around our story of the difficult things. So that includes denying the difficult emotions of those kinds of things. There needs to be space and time to express those as well. Some of the greatest books of all time have been written about really negative experiences, and they have made such an impact on so many people's lives. So we're not trying to avoid the negative, we're trying to expand to include it. That's just a little, side tack there that we want to make sure we don't go into. But really, then moving right along into how we can be mindful of our stories and have them be transformed into something that we can work with and lean into and express ourselves with, all of those kinds of things. Mindfulness work, and mindfulness in the way that I'm talking about it, is simply being aware of what my mind is thinking. And so I might be sitting waiting for someone to come, and I might be telling myself a story of they're not respectful of me. And that's not, they've never been a very good friend. And why am I wasting my time here? And the story that I'm generating there is generating very real emotions, and it will affect the rest of my life if I continue to tell that story. I might even tell the friend that I'm meeting that I don't want to spend time with them anymore because they don't respect my time, and all sorts of things like that. But if I can stay present and have the story flow through, so I can watch that story, I go, wow, my mind is telling a story that seems to indicate it's quite agitated. And I may hold on to that story, or I think I might let it move. What else is my mind thinking? Oh, my mind is worried about not getting the things done that I want to get done, or getting to the next appointment. Oh, okay, I can, So when I meet my person, I might say, oh, it's so good to see you, but I'm sorry, I do have to leave at this time. And so that story is in the flow of life. This is a very different thing than dragging old things or future things into the present moment. And so we want to pay attention with mindfulness about the story that we're telling right now. I work with a lot of addicts, and often they are what I call whistling in the dark. And they're telling themselves a story of, I'm going to be fine. It's all going to be good. I know everything now. And inevitably, they have a little problem down the line. But when they're working with that story, there's no room for that problem. And that can be actually deadly. And so I work a lot with telling people, be in the story of your life. That's great, but pay attention to what's going on right in front of you too, as your story unfolds. None of us know the whole story of our life going forward. We can imagine what we would like, and that's a wonderful practice. But being in the story of your life as it unfolds is so important. We want to recognize that kind of distorted thinking. The idea that it's all going to be fine, there's never going to be a problem. That could probably be the worst disease of mankind at the moment. And the other one would be, this is the way it should be. And so if I can have a story that opens up to the next things as they are, then I can have a beautifully unfolding story, and I can take advantage of what shows up in my life and consciously be deciding, am I going to include this or not? And so The idea of that is that maybe someone would invite me to go to a political rally about something I don't believe in. I probably would say, I'm not sure about that. I might ask to talk to them a little further about it and explore that in that way. But I'm not likely going to jump on the bandwagon right away because I have a story in my head about my beliefs. And I'm going to take it back, check against my beliefs, and go, okay, I might explore it a bit. And I might have moved a little bit, but maybe I'm not all the way over there. So the story that I have, even in the process of checking it out and not blindly adhering to it, can guide my life in the activities that I do, that the people I associate with, all of those things. And I can still be really open. The stories don't have to close us down to a narrow narrative. It can open us up even as we explore. My favorite story is the story of letting go of things. Everything that moves to me can move through me. And so that is tremendously helpful when I get very excited about something and I have the experience and then it's done. And I'm left like, oh, I gotta find another experience like that. But if I can just let it come to me and through me, and all of a sudden I have a new page in my book that says I had a wonderful experience, but I don't have to chase another experience like that. I can cherish that. And if I have a story about cherishing those experiences, I have a wonderful life. And if I have something difficult that happens to me and I can have it come and go, then I have another chapter of my story where there were some difficult things and then it became better. Because in real life, nothing ever stays really high and nothing ever stays really low for people. It is our reactions, our narratives about those things that take us where we go next. So this idea of that, there's some questions that were involved in the email that I sent out regarding this discussion. And I'm just going to put a couple of them out to you to think about. One of the questions they asked was, who am I without the story? And so it's not necessarily the big story of your life, but the story of the moment, maybe. Like, what if I am not a person that is a part of this, movement? What does it mean? Who am I? And it's an interesting question because we find it actually takes us down to different levels of other stories. And really, if we are just coming, sitting with ourselves, being mindful, at some point we go, wow, I am just the person listening or writing the story. And it shows us how wide open the possibilities are. How blank that page is, really, that we can actually write the story, because I am just a being when I don't have a story wrapped around it. But that's even a story, right? So the other two questions that I really wanted to put out and have people contemplate a little bit as we move along in this is, what stories do I tell myself that are no longer serving me? And this is not to do those bypasses we talked about, but it really is this story serving me? In therapy, we talk about a story until it doesn't have any hold on us anymore. It doesn't have that trigger or reaction. And as we have that, it sort of just blends into part of our history as opposed to part of our current experience. And so as we do this, when I ask myself about the stories that are no longer serving me, it's really interesting to explore and just feel. Don't ever discard a story that you're not ready to discard. And there may be reasons for you to hang on to that. It might be important to be able to know those things. And the last piece is about how can I create more space in my life for possibility and change? And the idea of what do I need to let go of in order to create a new story? So when we're thinking that, I would just encourage you to be really open-minded and open up your brain for whatever information it might have. You'd be surprised there is past information that might come up and feed you in a positive way, just like there are difficult things that come up for us that we haven't moved through. Sometimes we have positive stores of things that we were thinking about that we would like to try or be, or a different version of ourselves that we saw, that we recognized. So all of these can be brought forward into this possibility. And then we can take some time with just trying it on, just like you would take a book from the library and read it and decide, oh, I really like this story. Or maybe it's a self-help book and you'll read it and you'll go, yes, I'm going to try that. And there'll be lots of ones you go, nah, nah. So you do a lot of editing as you go through this. So let's take a breath. That was a pretty quick run through because this is such a big topic. But settle in, and if you're with me live, feel free to close your eyes, put up your feet, go off camera. And if you're joining us after, feel free to pause and just get organized to listen into your own mind. So as you breathe, I encourage you to relax your body. Because as you relax your body, your brain relaxes too. So take a couple of big breaths. And just start with that idea of sifting. What stories do you have that you often repeat in your life? And notice if they are ones that are providing you with something. Maybe they're providing you with encouragement. Maybe they're providing you with reasons, the way you act, the way you do. And notice in this relaxed body, do those stories make you feel more relaxed or less relaxed? You might actually run a visual picture of the story past yourself. Or you might hear a voice in your mind telling you the story. Just let yourself be the witness or the listener. And take a moment to just imagine a new story. Making a little space for it in your body, in your mind. What would be the story you would like to be telling? and just continue relaxing your body. We relax out of old stories and into new stories. And for most of us, there's some kind of transition marked with a point in time where we're ready to let go of something old or try something new on. But that point in time is generally when we have massaged our old ideas and stories for a bit, or tried on some new things just to see how we think they might go. So for those on the recording, enjoy the explorations. Thank you so much for joining us. You can send questions, comments, or donations to scientistsagesangha@gmail.com. Have a good night. I am with you. You are with me. Blessed be.